Rebecca wiped blood from her split lip as she sat in the corner of the Academy's vast library, trying to focus on her quantum mechanics homework, while her left eye swelled shut from this morning's encounter with Sek's armored fist. The textbook pages blurred together as tears of frustration mixed with the throbbing pain, radiating through her skull. 3 months had passed since she and her fellow humans David and Alex had arrived at the prestigious Galactic Youth Academy on Station Omega-7, and each day brought fresh humiliation at the hands of the Krillian students who ruled the social hierarchy with brutal efficiency. The towering reptilian beings stood nearly 8 feet tall, their natural armor plating gleaming under the station's artificial lighting as they moved through the corridors like apex predators stalking prey wrath. The leader of the Krillian pack possessed razor-sharp claws that could slice through metal, and a jaw filled with teeth designed for tearing flesh. His followers Gorm and Sek were equally intimidating, their warrior culture having bred generations of beings who viewed physical dominance as the ultimate measure of worth. Every species in the Academy understood this simple truth. Might made right, and humans were hopelessly outclassed in every category that mattered. The morning had started like so many others, with Rebecca hurrying through the residential sector toward her advanced chemistry class when Sek's massive form blocked her path in the narrow corridor. His yellow eyes gleamed with predatory amusement as he deliberately shouldered her into the wall, sending her books and tablets scattering across the deck. Plating other students from various species watched with cold indifference as she struggled to gather her scattered belongings. Clumsy little meat creature, Sek had growled in his guttural voice, grinding one of her data tablets under his clawed foot until the screen shattered into 1,000 pieces. Perhaps you should crawl instead of walking upright like the real beings. The Vithrak students, with their insectoid compound eyes and chitinous exoskeletons, had clicked their approval in their musical language, while the crystalline Solarans hummed in harmonic resonance that sounded almost like laughter. The gaseous nebulites, floating in their containment suits, pulsed with colors that Rebecca had learned indicated amusement at another being's suffering. No one helped her. No one spoke in her defense. No one even acknowledged that what they witnessed was wrong by any moral standard. David found her in the library hours later, his own collection of bruises and cuts telling the story of his encounter with Wrath during theoretical physics class. His usually neat brown hair was disheveled, and his academy uniform bore the distinctive claw marks that had become as common as breathing for the human students. His tablet lay in pieces in his backpack, destroyed when Wrath had accidentally knocked it from his hands during a particularly complex discussion about interstellar navigation. "They're getting worse," David said quietly, settling into the chair across from Rebecca with a wince that suggested broken ribs. "Gorm cornered me in the bathroom today and made it clear that humans don't deserve to breathe the same recycled air as real species. He suggested I might be happier in one of the waste processing units." Alex joined them minutes later, limping slightly from where Sek had kicked his legs out from under him during combat training. The instructor, a battle-scarred Krillian veteran named Commander Vex, had simply marked Alex's failure to maintain defensive posture as a learning experience while ignoring the blatantly illegal attack that had caused it. The message was crystal clear. Humans were fair game for any abuse the stronger species deemed appropriate. The 3 friends sat in miserable silence, surrounded by the academic achievements of dozens of galactic civilizations, while nursing wounds that spoke to humanity's apparent insignificance in the greater cosmic order. The library's vast collection contained the wisdom of ages, technological marvels that spanned millennia, and cultural treasures from worlds beyond imagination. Yet none of it seemed to offer solutions for beings whose only crime was being born on a small blue planet on the outer rim of galactic civilization. "The administration won't help," Alex muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I tried filing another complaint about the harassment. Dr. Holland just gave me the same speech about cultural differences and learning to adapt to galactic norms. Apparently, being terrorized by apex predators is considered character building." Rebecca touched her swollen eye and felt something dark and angry stirring in her chest. Her grandmother had always told her that humans possessed a strength that couldn't be measured in claws or fangs or armor plating, but sitting in that library with her friends' broken tablets and bleeding faces, She struggled to remember what that strength might be. The Krillians had made their position clear. Humans were weak, pathetic creatures who deserved whatever treatment the strong chose to inflict. The other species at the Academy had their own hierarchies and power structures, but none showed the casual cruelty that defined Krillian culture. The Vithrak competed through complex intellectual challenges, the Solarans through harmonic resonance competitions, and the Nebulites through atmospheric manipulation contests. Even their conflicts had rules, boundaries, and consequences for excessive behavior. Only the Krillians seemed to believe that might alone justified any action, no matter how brutal or senseless their homeworld of Krill Prime had forged them in constant warfare, creating beings who viewed every interaction as a potential battle to be won or lost. The strong took what they wanted, when they wanted it, and the weak existed only to serve as examples of what happened to those who couldn't defend themselves as. The station's artificial evening cycle dimmed the lights throughout the Academy. Rebecca found herself staring at a display case containing artifacts from Earth's contribution to galactic culture. A simple wooden spoon sat alongside advanced technological blueprints, representing humanity's strange fixation on domestic activities that other species found incomprehensible. Why would an intelligent species dedicate so much energy to food preparation and social dining, when synthesized nutrients could provide all necessary biological requirements? The question sparked something unexpected in Rebecca's mind as she remembered countless evenings around her family's dinner table, where her parents had solved problems, celebrated victories, and transformed strangers into friends through the simple act of sharing food. Her grandmother's stories flooded back, tales of enemy soldiers sharing rations in trenches, of feuding neighbors reconciled over apple pie, of business deals sealed with handshakes and home-cooked meals. What if we've been thinking about this all wrong? She said suddenly, her voice cutting through the library's quiet atmosphere. David and Alex looked at her with expressions of confusion and concern, probably wondering if the day's beating had affected her reasoning abilities. "What do you mean?" David asked carefully, his tone suggesting he was prepared to call for medical assistance if necessary. Rebecca stood slowly, her body protesting every movement as she walked to the display case containing Earth's cultural contributions. The wooden spoon seemed to mock her with its simplicity, a primitive tool from a primitive species that couldn't even defend itself against basic bullying. Yet something about it called to memories of strength that had nothing to do with physical power. "I mean, what if our strength isn't what they think it is?" she said, turning to face her friends with an expression that had shifted from defeated to thoughtful. "Every species here respects combat prowess, territorial dominance, and physical superiority. But what if humans have something else entirely? Something they've never encountered before?" Alex's eyes narrowed as he studied Rebecca's face, probably searching for signs of concussion or psychological breakdown. "Becca, they just spent 3 months proving that we're the weakest beings in the galaxy. We can't fight them. We can't intimidate. Then we can't even get the administration to acknowledge that we exist. What possible strength could we have that matters in this environment?" Rebecca smiled for the first time in weeks, and despite her swollen lip and blackened eye, something dangerous and determined flickered in her expression. "We could invite them to dinner." The silence that followed Rebecca's suggestion stretched across the library like a physical presence, broken only by the gentle hum of the station's life support systems. David stared at his friend as if she had sprouted additional limbs, while Alex's jaw dropped open in an expression of complete bewilderment. Several Vithrak students at nearby tables turned their compound eyes toward the human group, their antennae twitching with what might have been curiosity or amusement at the strange behavior of the inferior species. "You want to invite our tormentors to dinner," David said slowly, each word carefully measured as if he was afraid that speaking too quickly might shatter Rebecca's fragile grip on sanity. "The same beings who just spent 3 months making our lives a living nightmare, the ones who destroy our property, assault us in corridors and treat us like vermin. That's your solution to our problem?" Rebecca remained standing by the display case, her fingers trailing along the transparent aluminum surface as she studied the simple wooden spoon that represented her species' contribution to galactic civilization. Her reflection looked back at her through the bruised features and swollen eye. but something had changed in her expression during the past few minutes. The defeated victim had been replaced by someone calculating possibilities that existed beyond the obvious. "Think about it," she said, turning back to face her friends while ignoring the curious stares from other students. "Every species in this academy has a clearly defined power structure. The Krillians dominate through physical strength, the Vithrak through intellectual superiority, the Solarans through harmonic resonance mastery, the Nebulites through atmospheric manipulation. But all of them follow the same basic principle: establish dominance and maintain it through superior capabilities." Alex shook his head vigorously, wincing as the movement aggravated injuries from his earlier encounter with Sex Boot. "That's exactly why your idea is insane. They've already established dominance over us through superior capabilities. Inviting them to dinner just confirms our submission. It's like painting a target on our backs and then asking them to aim more carefully." But David had grown quiet, his analytical mind working through the implications of Rebecca's suggestion as he studied her face with the intensity he usually reserved for complex mathematical equations. They had known each other since childhood on Earth, and he recognized the expression she wore when her mind had latched onto an idea that everyone else considered impossible. His grandmother had possessed the same look when she talked about transforming bitter enemies into lifelong friends through the simple act of radical hospitality. "What are you really thinking, Becca?" he asked softly, leaning forward in his chair despite the protest from his injured ribs. "Because I know that look, and it means you've seen something the rest of us have missed." Rebecca moved away from the display case and settled back into her chair, her movements careful but purposeful as she pulled up cultural databases on her backup tablet. The device was an older model, barely functional compared to the advanced systems used by other species, but it contained humanity's entire recorded history of conflict resolution through social interaction. "I've been researching how other species handle disputes," she explained, her fingers dancing across the tablet's cracked screen. "The Krillians settle everything through combat trials. The Vithrak use intellectual challenges that can last for days. The Solarans engage in harmonic duels that sometimes shatter crystal formations. The Nebulites literally storm at each other until one side surrenders, but humans do something completely different." She pulled up historical records that chronicled humanity's strangest diplomatic victories. The Christmas Truce of 1914, where enemy soldiers emerged from trenches to share food and play football in no man's land. The Peace of Westphalia, negotiated over months of elaborate banquets. The Camp David Accords, sealed with handshakes and home-cooked meals served by world leaders to their former enemies. "We invite people to dinner," Rebecca continued, her voice gaining strength as she scrolled through example after example. "We feed them. We make them comfortable. We treat them like honored guests until they remember how to be human. We've been doing it for thousands of years, and it's how we've survived every attempt to destroy us through superior force." Alex stared at the historical records with growing amazement, his analytical mind struggling to process the concept of voluntary vulnerability as a strategic advantage. But that only works when both sides are human, when they share the same basic emotional and social programming. The Krillians don't think like us. They're apex predators who view kindness as weakness and hospitality as submission. "Maybe," Rebecca admitted, closing the tablet and meeting her friend's concerned gazes. "Or maybe they've never encountered anything like it before. Maybe their entire worldview is built on the assumption that every interaction is a zero-sum game where someone has to lose for someone else to win. What if we showed them something different? What if we demonstrated that making others strong doesn't make you weak?" David felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't experienced since arriving at the academy. Hope mixed with terrifying possibility. The idea was either brilliant or suicidal, possibly both. But it carried the weight of humanity's entire history of transforming enemies into allies through radical acts of trust and generosity. His own family had stories of great-grandparents who had changed hearts and minds by setting extra places at dinner tables for people who had tried to destroy them. "The administration will never approve it," Alex said, but his voice lacked conviction as he studied the historical records on Rebecca's tablet. "Dr. Holland is already worried about humanity's reputation in the galactic community. If this goes wrong, it could set back human acceptance by decades. And if we do nothing, we spend the next 3 years being terrorized by bullies while the rest of the galaxy watches and does nothing, Rebecca countered. At least this way, we're taking action. We're demonstrating that humans don't just survive through superior technology or military might. We survive by building communities and transforming conflicts into conversations. The three friends sat in contemplative silence as the implications of Rebecca's proposal sank in through their exhausted minds. The plan was unprecedented in galactic diplomatic history, victims voluntarily inviting their oppressors to share food, and culture in an act of radical hospitality that defied every known social norm. Other species would view it as either supreme confidence or complete submission, with potentially catastrophic consequences for humanity's standing in the galactic community. How would it even work? David asked finally, his practical mind already working through logistics and potential obstacles. We can't just walk up to Wrath and casually invite him to share synthesized nutrients in the cafeteria. It has to be formal, official, something that can't be dismissed as desperate begging or cultural ignorance. Rebecca smiled despite her injuries, the expression transforming her battered features into something approaching radiance as she outlined the plan that had been forming in her mind throughout their conversation. They would request access to the Cultural Exchange Dining Facility, a space designed for interspecies diplomatic functions that had never been used by students before. They would prepare a traditional human meal using ingredients requisitioned from the station's hydroponics bays. They would serve it personally, treating their tormentors as honored guests in a formal ceremony that acknowledged their status while demonstrating humanity's unique approach to conflict resolution. We'll send the invitation through official channels, she explained, her fingers already composing the message on her tablet. Formal diplomatic language requesting the honor of hosting 3 distinguished Krillian students for an evening of cultural exchange. We'll make it clear that this is about sharing human traditions, not about begging for mercy or negotiating terms of surrender. Alex looked at his friends as if seeing them clearly for the first time since arriving at the academy, noting the determined set of Rebecca's jaw and the calculating gleam in David's eyes. These weren't the broken victims who had been shuffling through corridors with downcast gazes and defensive postures. These were human beings, remembering what that classification meant in terms of historical survival against impossible odds. They'll accept, he said quietly, the certainty in his voice surprising all 3 of them. They'll accept because they'll be curious about what we're really planning. They'll think it's either pathetic submission or some kind of trap, but their warrior culture won't let them show weakness by refusing a direct challenge. David nodded slowly as he considered the psychological dynamics at play, and once they're sitting at our table eating our food and participating in our customs, they'll be operating in our cultural framework instead of theirs. For the first time since we arrived, we'll have home field advantage. Rebecca sent the invitation before she could change her mind, the message disappearing into the station's communication network with a soft chime that seemed to echo through the library like a bell, tolling the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. The 3 humans sat in stunned silence, as they realized they had just committed themselves to the most audacious act of diplomacy in their species' short galactic career. The response came back within minutes, formal acceptance from Wrath, Gorm, and Sek, though the tone suggested curiosity about human subservience rather than genuine interest in cultural exchange. The Krillian students had agreed to attend what they undoubtedly viewed as either a surrender ceremony or an elaborate form of entertainment at their victims' expense. Well, David said finally, his voice carrying equal parts terror and exhilaration. I guess we're really doing this. Word spread through the Galactic Youth Academy like wildfire through dry grass, carried by the gossip networks that connected every species and social group on Station Omega-7. Students huddled in small clusters throughout the corridors, their conversations dominated by speculation about the humans' unprecedented invitation to their Krillian tormentors. The consensus among most species was clear. The weak had finally acknowledged their proper place in the galactic hierarchy by formally submitting to their natural superiors. Rebecca ignored the stares and whispered comments as she made her way through the hydroponics bay, carefully selecting ingredients that would transform the sterile cultural exchange dining hall into something resembling warmth and hospitality. The automated systems had provided everything she requested, though the Vithrak technician managing the facility had clicked disapprovingly at the inefficiency of using fresh ingredients instead of perfectly adequate synthesized nutrients. Your species wastes considerable energy on food preparation rituals, the insectoid being had observed, his compound eyes reflecting rainbow patterns as he processed her request for actual vegetables instead of nutritionally optimized paste. The hive determined centuries ago that such activities serve no logical purpose beyond primitive social bonding mechanisms. Maybe that's the point, Rebecca had replied quietly, running her fingers through soil that reminded her of her grandmother's garden back on Earth. Maybe the point isn't efficiency. Maybe it's about creating something beautiful together, something that transforms a simple biological necessity into an expression of care and connection. The Vithrak had simply clicked his confusion and returned to his efficiency calculations, unable to comprehend why any intelligent species would choose complexity over optimization. But Rebecca understood something that the insectoid couldn't grasp. The meal itself was secondary to what it represented, and what it represented was humanity's fundamental belief that former enemies could become future friends through the radical act of shared vulnerability. David spent those 3 days researching Krillian dietary restrictions and cultural taboos, ensuring that their dinner wouldn't accidentally violate any sacred customs that might transform hospitality into insult. His academic training in xenobiology served him well as he navigated the complex web of nutritional requirements and religious prohibitions that governed Krillian eating habits. Their warrior culture had elaborate rules about food sharing, most of which assumed that meals were either spoils of victory or tributes from the conquered. "This is fascinating," he told Rebecca and Alex as they gathered in their shared dormitory to review his findings. "Krillian culture has no concept of a voluntary hospitality between equals. Their entire social framework is built around dominance hierarchies where food sharing always represents either submission or charity. The idea of treating enemies as honored guests literally doesn't exist. In their cultural vocabulary," Alex looked up from his own research, surrounded by historical accounts of human diplomatic victories that defied conventional wisdom. That might work in our favor. If they don't have a cultural framework for understanding what we're doing, they can't respond with their normal dominance behaviors. They'll be operating without a script for the first time since we met them. The transformation of the cultural exchange dining hall required all 3 days and considerable creativity, with the facility's limited customization options. The sterile space slowly evolved into something that reminded the humans of home, with soft lighting that mimicked Earth's sunset colors and aromatic scents from herbs that grew in small pots throughout the room. Rebecca had spent hours arranging flowers and greenery from the hydroponics bay, creating centerpieces that brought life and color to the metallic surfaces. Other students began gathering outside the dining hall as news of the preparations spread throughout the academy. The transparent aluminum walls allowed clear views of the humans' activities, and dozens of beings from various species pressed against the barriers to observe what many considered either the most pathetic surrender in galactic history or an elaborate form of performance art. Commander Vex, the battle-scarred Krillian who supervised combat training, arrived on the second day to inspect the preparations. Her massive frame filled the doorway as she surveyed the transformed space with predatory yellow eyes that missed nothing. Her expression suggested equal parts amusement and confusion at the humans' strange behavior. "You prepare tribute for your betters," she observed in her guttural voice, though something in her tone indicated uncertainty about her own assessment. "This is proper acknowledgement of strength hierarchy, though your methods remain incomprehensible." "It's not tribute," Rebecca replied respectfully, continuing to arrange place settings with careful attention to detail. "We're preparing to share our culture with guests we hope to understand better. We believe that every being deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their position in any hierarchy." The commander's scarred features twisted into something that might have been confusion or contempt. "Dignity for the weak serves no evolutionary purpose. Respect must be earned through demonstration of superior capabilities your species possesses. No such capabilities, yet you persist in behaviors that suggest otherwise." David stepped forward. his academic instincts recognizing an opportunity for genuine cultural exchange despite the commander's hostile tone. With respect, Commander, perhaps strength can be defined in multiple ways. Human civilization survived and thrived not because we were the strongest or fastest or most dangerous species on our planet, but because we learned to work together to transform challenges into opportunities. Working together is herd behavior suitable for prey animals, Commander Vex replied dismissively, though her eyes continued to study the dining hall's transformation. With obvious fascination, apex predators take what they need through superior force, the strong rule because they possess the power to enforce their will upon the weak. Then why are you here? Alex asked quietly, his question carrying no challenge or disrespect but genuine curiosity. If our behavior is so obviously pathetic and meaningless, why does it merit your personal attention? Why are dozens of students gathering outside to watch something that should be completely predictable? The commander's silence stretched across several minutes as she processed Alex's question, her predatory instincts apparently sensing something that her cultural programming couldn't identify or categorize. Finally, she spoke in a voice that carried less certainty than before. Your behavior patterns do not conform to established models of submission or defiance. You demonstrate neither appropriate fear of superior beings nor logical preparation for combat. You simply continue with activities that serve no apparent purpose in advancing your species' survival prospects. Rebecca smiled as she lit candles that cast dancing shadows across the carefully prepared table. Maybe that's because we're not trying to survive through traditional methods. Maybe we're trying to live. And there's a difference between surviving and living that can't be measured in terms of dominance hierarchies or combat effectiveness. Dr. Holland arrived that evening as the humans put finishing touches on their preparations, her expression mixing concern with grudging admiration for her students' dedication to their impossible plan. The human faculty member had spent 3 days trying to convince the administration to cancel the dinner, arguing that it could only end in humiliation for their already struggling species. This will make everything worse, she warned, studying the transformed dining hall with professional assessment of potential diplomatic disasters. The other species already view humans as weak and primitive. This confirms their worst assumptions about our inability to adapt to galactic social norms, Dr. Holland, David said respectfully, pausing in his arrangement of serving dishes that had been crafted specifically for the evening. What if our inability to adapt to their norms is actually our greatest strength? What if we're not supposed to become like them, but instead show them possibilities they've never considered? The professor stared at her student as if seeing him clearly for the first time since classes began. David, do you understand the risks you're taking? If this dinner goes badly, if the Krillians interpret your hospitality as weakness or mockery, the consequences won't just affect the 3 of you. Every human student, every human faculty member, every human diplomat in the galaxy will suffer from the precedent you're setting. And if we do nothing, Rebecca replied, her voice carrying quiet determination as she made final adjustments to the lighting, every human in the galaxy will continue to be viewed as inferior beings who accept abuse because they lack the strength to demand better treatment. At least this way, we're taking action. We're demonstrating that humans possess something worth understanding, even if it doesn't fit into traditional categories of strength or weakness. The evening arrived with artificial twilight dimming throughout the station's corridors, as automated systems simulated the day-night cycles that most species required for psychological stability. The 3 humans stood in their transformed dining hall wearing formal attire that they had borrowed, purchased, and improvised from various sources. Their clothes weren't military uniforms or ceremonial robes designed to intimidate enemies. They were simple, elegant garments that spoke of respect for the occasion and care for their guests' comfort. Outside the transparent walls, representatives from dozens of species had gathered to witness what many expected would be either a formal surrender ceremony or an elaborate humiliation ritual. The Academy's social networks buzzed with speculation about human motivations and predictions about Krillian responses. None of the observers seemed to consider the possibility that they might be witnessing something entirely unprecedented in galactic diplomatic history. As the appointed time approached, Rebecca felt her heart racing with adrenaline that had nothing to do with fear of physical violence and everything to do with the terrifying possibility that they were about to demonstrate either humanity's greatest strength or its most spectacular failure. The dinner represented more than just an attempt to resolve personal conflicts. It was humanity's first real opportunity to show the galaxy what their species could contribute to interstellar civilization. "Whatever happens tonight," Alex said quietly as they waited for their guests to arrive, "at least we'll know we tried something different, something that honored our ancestors and represented the best of what humans can be." David nodded, straightening his borrowed jacket, as he prepared to welcome beings who had spent months tormenting them. "And if it works, if we actually manage to change their minds, or at least open them to new possibilities, we'll have proven that there's more than one way to be strong in this galaxy." The dining hall's entrance chimed softly as three massive figures approached through the corridor, their armored forms casting long shadows across the station's deck. Plating Wrath, Gorm, and Sek moved with the predatory grace of apex hunters, their yellow eyes scanning for threats and weaknesses as they prepared to encounter their human prey, in what they undoubtedly expected would be either a surrender ceremony or an elaborate trap. The three Krillians entered the transformed dining hall with the cautious movement of apex predators entering unfamiliar territory, their massive frames seeming to fill the entire space despite its generous dimensions. Wrath's yellow eyes swept across the carefully arranged table settings and aromatic displays with the intensity of a hunter searching for hidden traps, while Gorm and Sek flanked him in defensive positions that spoke to their warrior training and ingrained mistrust of situations they couldn't immediately categorize or control. Rebecca stepped forward with a formal bow that conveyed respect without submission, her movements graceful despite the lingering soreness from days of preparation, mixed with weeks of physical abuse. The gesture seemed to confuse the Krillians more than any aggressive challenge might have, as their cultural programming had no framework for interpreting voluntary courtesy from beings they considered inferior prey. "Thank you for accepting our invitation," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the dining hall with quiet dignity that somehow commanded attention from the towering reptilian beings. "We're honored to share our culture with guests. We hope to understand better. Please, make yourselves comfortable." The confusion in Wrath's predatory features was immediate and profound, his scarred snout wrinkling as he processed sensory information that contradicted everything his warrior culture had taught him about proper interactions between strong and weak beings. The dining hall smelled of herbs and spices that triggered genetic memories of hunting and feeding, but the context was completely wrong for any scenario his species had encountered in millennia of conquest and domination. "You prepare feast for those who have defeated you," Gorm observed in his rumbling voice, though uncertainty crept through his words as he studied the elegant table settings and carefully arranged flowers. This acknowledgement of proper hierarchy, though methods remained strange and inefficient compared to simple submission displays. David moved to pull out chairs for their guests, his academic training helping him recognize the delicate balance between showing respect and maintaining dignity. "Actually, this isn't about hierarchy at all. This is about hospitality, which is something different entirely. We wanted to share food and conversation with beings we'd like to know as individuals, rather than just as representatives of your species." The concept seemed to short-circuit something fundamental in Sek's worldview, his massive head tilting with reptilian confusion as he processed the idea of treating enemies as anything other than obstacles to be overcome or resources to be exploited. His clawed hands flexed unconsciously as he struggled to identify the threat that had to be hidden somewhere in this unprecedented situation. "Individuals?" he repeated slowly, as if tasting an unfamiliar word. "We are Krillian warriors of the Bloodclaw clan trained from hatching to bring glory through conquest. Individual identity serves no purpose beyond demonstrating superior capabilities in combat and territorial expansion." Alex began serving the first course, a simple soup made from vegetables grown in the station's hydroponics bay, but prepared according to recipes passed down through generations of human families. His movements were precise and respectful, treating each guest as if they were honored diplomats rather than the beings who had terrorized him for months. "But you're not just warriors. he said conversationally while ladling aromatic broth into bowls designed specifically for Krillian facial structure. Wrath, your academic records show exceptional performance in theoretical physics, Gorm. You've written poetry that's been published in your homeworld's literary journals. Sec, your mathematical proofs have advanced our understanding of quantum mechanics in ways that benefit every species in the galaxy. The three Krillians exchanged glances that mixed surprise with something approaching alarm, their warrior facades cracking slightly as they realized these supposedly inferior beings had taken time to research their individual achievements rather than simply preparing for surrender or attempting to curry favor through generic flattery. How do you possess this information? Wrath demanded, though his tone carried more curiosity than threat as he inhaled the soup's unfamiliar but appealing scents. Personal accomplishments beyond combat victories are not typically shared with prey species. Rebecca settled into her own chair, her movements creating an atmosphere of casual intimacy that somehow made the massive predators seem less threatening despite their obvious physical advantages. We researched your backgrounds because we wanted to understand who you really are beneath the warrior roles your culture demands. We believe that every being has multiple aspects to their identity, and we were curious about the parts that don't involve dominance hierarchies. The dinner progressed through multiple courses, each prepared with careful attention to Krillian dietary requirements, but presented according to human traditions that emphasize sharing, conversation, and mutual respect. David explained the historical significance of various dishes, tracing how recipes had traveled across continents as human civilizations encountered each other through trade, migration, and cultural exchange rather than purely through conquest. This bread recipe originated in what we called ancient Egypt, he said, breaking a warm loaf that filled the air with yeast and grain aromas. It traveled along trade routes to Greece, then Rome, then spread throughout Europe and eventually to the Americas. Our ancestors shared food and cooking techniques even with groups they were fighting, because they recognized that good ideas belong to everyone. The concept seemed to disturb Gorm. On a fundamental level, his scarred features twisting with confusion as he processed the idea of voluntary knowledge sharing between competing groups. Why would you strengthen potential enemies by giving them access to superior food preparation techniques? This behavior reduces competitive advantage and weakens your species' survival prospects. Because we learned something that took us thousands of years to understand, Rebecca replied, refilling water glasses with unconscious grace that spoke to ingrained habits of hospitality. Making others strong doesn't make you weak. Making others successful doesn't diminish your own achievements. Making others happy doesn't reduce your own happiness. The universe isn't a zero-sum game where someone has to lose for someone else to win. Alex demonstrated the human ritual of toasting, raising his glass while explaining how the gesture symbolized trust and shared celebration. When we lift our glasses together, we're showing that neither of us holds weapons. We're choosing vulnerability over vigilance. We're saying that this moment, right now, we trust each other enough to celebrate something together. The three Krillians stared at their raised glasses with expressions of complete bewilderment, their warrior instincts screaming warnings about the tactical disadvantage of deliberately abandoning defensive postures while in the presence of potential threats. Yet something about the moment's sincerity made it impossible to interpret the gesture as mockery or manipulation. On Krill Prime, Wrath said slowly, his voice carrying none of its usual aggressive certainty. Strength is demonstrated through successful resource acquisition from weaker beings. The strong eat first, always, and the weak survive on whatever remains after superior needs are satisfied. This is natural law that ensures species survival through proper selection pressure. That makes perfect evolutionary sense in a resource-scarce environment, David acknowledged thoughtfully, his response validating rather than challenging the Krillian worldview. Survival of the fittest ensures genetic diversity and adaptive capability when circumstances demand maximum efficiency. But what happens when resources become abundant? When cooperation yields more benefits than competition? When the greatest survival advantage comes from building communities instead of dominating individuals? The questions hung in the air like a philosophical challenge that couldn't be resolved through physical combat or territorial display. The three predators found themselves engaging in the kind of abstract discussion that their warrior culture typically dismissed as weakness. Yet the humans' sincere curiosity about their perspectives made it impossible to respond with simple aggression. As the evening progressed, other academy students gathered outside the dining hall in increasing numbers, pressing against the transparent walls to witness something that defied every assumption about interspecies power dynamics. The observers saw apex predators sitting peacefully, participating in conversation rather than domination rituals, their weapons and aggressive postures set aside as they engaged with concepts that existed beyond their cultural programming. Gorm had grown unusually quiet as the meal continued. His massive frame relaxed in ways that suggested genuine comfort rather than tactical positioning. Finally, he spoke in a voice that carried confusion mixed with something approaching vulnerability. "Why do you show kindness to beings who have caused you nothing but pain and humiliation? We destroyed your property, we attacked your bodies, we mocked your species before others. Why respond with hospitality instead of seeking proper revenge?" Rebecca's answer was simple and devastating. In its sincerity, because that's what humans do. We see potential allies, not eternal enemies. We see beings worth knowing, not just obstacles to overcome. We believe that every individual has the capacity for growth, change, and friendship if given the opportunity to discover those possibilities. The statement seemed to strike something fundamental in sex consciousness, his predatory features softening as he processed the concept of voluntary vulnerability as strength rather than weakness. His clawed hands, which had spent months inflicting damage on human property and bodies, now held delicate glassware with surprising gentleness. "Your species survived to achieve interstellar travel through this philosophy?" he asked, his voice carrying genuine scientific curiosity rather than the mockery that usually characterized his interactions with humans. This seems to contradict basic evolutionary principles regarding competitive advantage and resource acquisition. Alex leaned forward, his eyes bright with the passion that had driven him through years of xenobiology studies. "That's exactly the point. Our species didn't survive, despite our cooperative tendencies. We survived because of them. Human civilization advanced faster when we shared knowledge than when we hoarded it. We solved problems more effectively when we worked together than when we competed. We created art, literature, science, and technology that benefited everyone rather than just the strongest individuals." David pulled up historical records on his tablet, displaying images of human achievements that had required massive cooperative efforts rather than individual dominance. "These are our pyramids, built by thousands of people working together. These are our cathedrals, constructed over centuries by generations who would never see the finished product. These are our space programs, achieved through international cooperation between former enemies. These are our medical advances, shared freely with anyone who needed them." The three Krillians studied the images with growing amazement, their warrior conditioning struggling to process evidence of a species that had achieved galactic status through methods that their culture considered impossible weakness. Yet the proof surrounded them in the form of the space station itself, the Academy's advanced technology, and the simple fact that humans had been invited to join the galactic community despite lacking the military might that usually guaranteed membership. "Your ancestors built monuments to honor cooperation rather than conquest?" Wrath asked, his voice carrying none of its usual aggressive certainty. "They created beauty that served no tactical advantage. They advanced science that benefited competitors. They shared resources with beings who could not reciprocate equivalent value. They did all of that and more," Rebecca replied, serving the final course with movements that had become natural over the course of the evening. "But most importantly, they never stopped believing that former enemies could become future friends, that conflicts could be resolved through understanding rather than domination, that the strongest societies were built on inclusion rather than exclusion." The conversation continued as artificial night settled over the station, with topics ranging from Krillian poetry to human music to the mathematical principles that governed interstellar navigation. The three predators found themselves sharing personal stories and individual dreams that their warrior culture had taught them to suppress as signs of weakness, while the humans listened with genuine interest and responded with their own experiences of growth, failure, and discovery. Outside the dining hall, the crowd of observers had grown to include faculty members from multiple species, all witnessing something unprecedented in galactic diplomatic history. The Academy's social networks buzzed with confused attempts to categorize what they were seeing. Apex predators engaged in peaceful conversation with their supposed prey, warriors discussing philosophy instead of combat tactics, beings who had spent months establishing dominance hierarchies now participating in activities that suggested mutual respect. Commander Vex arrived near midnight, her battle-scarred frame filling the entrance as she surveyed the transformed dining hall with predatory eyes that had witnessed countless victories and defeats. Her expression suggested equal parts confusion and grudging respect for an outcome that defied every prediction. Her warrior experience had generated, "Your prey demonstrates behavior patterns inconsistent with proper submission protocols," she observed in her guttural voice, though uncertainty crept through her words as she studied the peaceful scene. They show no fear of superior beings. They offer no tribute appropriate to their defeated status. They simply continue with activities that serve no apparent tactical purpose. Wrath looked up from his conversation about quantum mechanics. His massive frame relaxed in ways that his military instructor had never witnessed in decades of combat training. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "they demonstrate something that cannot be categorized as either submission or defiance. Perhaps they demonstrate a third option that our culture has never encountered before." The evening ended with handshakes rather than ritual combat, with expressions of mutual respect rather than acknowledgement of hierarchy, with invitations for future conversations rather than terms of surrender. The three Krillians departed the dining hall in thoughtful silence, their warrior programming, struggling to process an experience that had challenged every assumption about strength, weakness, and the proper relationships between different species. As the humans cleaned up after their unprecedented dinner, they moved with quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with victory over defeated enemies and everything to do with the possibility that they had planted seeds of understanding in minds that had never considered alternatives to dominance and submission. "I think we just changed something fundamental," David said quietly, as he gathered dishes that bore the traces of shared meals and genuine conversation. Not just for them, but for everyone who witnessed tonight, maybe for the entire galaxy's understanding of what strength really means. Rebecca smiled as she extinguished the candles that had cast dancing shadows across their transformed space. "Maybe we just reminded them that there's more than one way to be strong in this universe, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is invite your enemy to dinner and treat them like a friend until they remember how to be one." News of the dinner spread through galactic communication networks like ripples through still water, carrying implications that reached far beyond a simple student interaction on a remote academy station. Within hours, cultural analysts from dozens of species were requesting copies of the event recordings, their academic institutions struggling to categorize what had occurred using traditional frameworks of interspecies conflict resolution. Dr. Voss, the distinguished Krillian xenosociology professor whose research had established the theoretical foundations for warrior culture supremacy, sat in her private office reviewing footage of the evening with growing bewilderment. Her scaled features reflected the confusion of a scientist encountering data that contradicted centuries of established theory about power dynamics and social hierarchy. The recording showed something that shouldn't have been possible, according to every model her species had developed. Apex predators voluntarily abandoning dominance behaviors in favor of cooperative interaction with inferior beings. The three human students had somehow achieved what military conquest and political pressure had never accomplished throughout galactic history. They had changed fundamental assumptions about the nature of strength itself. "This challenges everything we understand about successful species development," she dictated to her research assistant, a nervous young Krillian whose training emphasized combat effectiveness over analytical thinking. The humans demonstrated no superior capabilities, yet they achieved outcomes that suggest strategic advantage. How do weak beings gain influence over strong ones without employing deception or manipulation? The answer eluded conventional analysis because it existed outside the theoretical frameworks that governed interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. Human behavior patterns didn't fit into categories of dominance or submission, victory or defeat, strength or weakness. Their approach represented something entirely unprecedented: voluntary vulnerability as a demonstration of confidence rather than desperation. Meanwhile, the three human students continued their daily routines, with a significant difference in their treatment by other academy residents. The casual abuse and systematic harassment that had characterized their first months at the institution had ceased entirely, replaced by curious observation and cautious respect from beings who no longer knew how to categorize their status in the social hierarchy. Wrath approached David in the library 3 days after the dinner, his massive frame moving with uncharacteristic hesitation as he navigated between study tables designed for smaller species. His presence caused a ripple of silence throughout the academic space, other students pausing their research to observe an interaction that might establish new precedents for interspecies behavior. Your mathematical analysis of quantum field fluctuations contains insights that could advance my theoretical physics research, the Krillian said quietly, his guttural voice stripped of its usual aggressive undertones. Would you be willing to collaborate on problems that neither of us could solve independently? The question represented a seismic shift in academy social dynamics, as Krillian students had never voluntarily sought academic cooperation with beings they considered intellectually inferior. David looked up from his calculations with genuine pleasure, recognizing an opportunity to build on the foundation they had established during dinner. I'd be honored to work with you, he replied simply, his response carrying none of the fear or subservience that had characterized previous interactions. I've been struggling with some aspects of dimensional mathematics that might benefit from your expertise in warrior culture. Problem-solving approaches. Their collaboration began that afternoon and continued over subsequent weeks, producing theoretical breakthroughs that advanced understanding in ways that purely individual effort had never achieved. Other students observed with growing amazement as the unlikely partnership demonstrated practical benefits of cooperative behavior that transcended species boundaries and cultural programming. Gorm surprised everyone, including himself, by requesting access to the Academy's creative writing workshops where he could develop his poetry without the constant pressure to demonstrate warrior credibility. His literary work had always been a carefully hidden aspect of his identity, suppressed by cultural expectations that viewed artistic expression as incompatible with proper Krillian behavior. Rebecca found him one evening in the Academy's observation deck, staring through transparent aluminum at the stars that surrounded their orbital station. His massive frame seemed diminished by contemplation, his predatory features softened by thoughts that reached beyond conquest and territorial expansion. I have written verses about the beauty of distant worlds, he admitted quietly, his voice carrying vulnerability that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. But Krillian culture teaches that beauty serves no evolutionary purpose, that warriors should not waste mental energy on concepts that provide no tactical advantage. Yet your dinner demonstrated that appreciation for beauty might itself be a form of strength. Rebecca settled beside him, her small human frame dwarfed by his reptilian bulk, but somehow creating an atmosphere of equality rather than predator-prey dynamics. Beauty doesn't have to serve a tactical purpose to be valuable. Maybe its value lies in reminding us that existence involves more than just survival. Maybe appreciation for beauty is what transforms surviving into living. Their conversations became regular occurrences, with the unlikely pair discussing poetry, philosophy, and the complex relationships between strength and sensitivity that both their cultures struggled to understand. Gorm's warrior training had never prepared him for friendship based on mutual respect rather than dominance hierarchy, but he found himself adapting to concepts that his people had considered impossible. Weakness, sex transformation proved equally remarkable as he began questioning the fundamental assumptions about competition and cooperation that had governed his entire worldview. His mathematical brilliance had always been channeled toward military applications, but exposure to human collaborative methods opened possibilities he had never considered. Your species achieves superior results through knowledge sharing rather than information hoarding, he observed during one of their joint research sessions. This contradicts everything my culture taught about maintaining competitive advantage, yet the evidence suggests that cooperation amplifies individual capabilities rather than diminishing them. Alex smiled as he pulled up examples of human scientific advancement that had resulted from international collaboration between former enemies. The greatest breakthroughs in human history happened when we stopped treating knowledge as a weapon to be hoarded and started treating it as a gift to be shared. Our space program succeeded because countries that had been fighting each other decided to work together. Our medical advances saved lives because researchers shared data freely. Our technological development accelerated when we realized that making everyone smarter made everyone stronger. The Academy's administration began receiving requests from other galactic institutions seeking to understand what had occurred on Station Omega-7 cultural exchange programs that had operated for centuries, without significant interspecies. Understanding suddenly showed potential for genuine transformation, rather than mere tolerance of differences. Dr. Holland found herself fielding communication requests from diplomatic corps throughout the galaxy, her small office becoming an unofficial center for studying what media outlets had begun calling the humanity factor in conflict resolution. Her initial concerns about damage to human reputation had been replaced by amazement at her species' sudden elevation to prominent status in galactic society. "They want to know how we did it," she told the 3 students during one of their regular consultation meetings. "Universities are requesting human guest lecturers. Military academies want to study our diplomatic methods. Cultural institutions are asking for examples of human cooperation throughout history. Everyone wants to understand how 3 students achieved what entire diplomatic missions had never accomplished. But the most significant changes occurred in daily interactions throughout the academy as students from multiple species began experimenting with cooperation rather than competition. Vythrak intellectual challenges became collaborative problem-solving sessions. Solar and harmonic duels evolved into musical cooperation that created beauty beyond individual capability. Nebulite atmospheric competitions transformed into joint weather management projects that benefited entire station populations. The transformation wasn't universal or immediate. Some species maintained their traditional power, structures, and competitive behaviors. But enough individuals had witnessed alternatives to dominance hierarchy that new possibilities began emerging throughout galactic society. 6 months after the dinner, Rebecca received a formal invitation to address the Galactic Cultural Council about human approaches to conflict resolution. The message carried endorsements from dozens of species representatives, including 3 Krillian military commanders, who had never previously acknowledged human competence in any significant capacity. "They want me to explain how hospitality can be stronger than hostility," she told David and Alex as they reviewed the invitation's formal language, "how voluntary vulnerability demonstrates confidence rather than weakness, how treating enemies as potential friends can transform entire civilizations." David looked up. From his latest collaborative research project with Wrath, their joint theoretical work having advanced quantum mechanics in ways that neither species had achieved independently. "What will you tell them?" Rebecca smiled as she composed her acceptance response, her words carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had discovered fundamental truths about the nature of strength and civilization. "I'll tell them that humans learned something important during our long journey from primitive tribes to galactic citizens. We learned that the most powerful force in the universe isn't the ability to destroy enemies, it's the wisdom to transform them into allies. And sometimes the most devastating weapon you can deploy is an invitation to break bread together." The galaxy would never view humanity the same way again, but more importantly, humanity had reminded the galaxy that there were multiple definitions of strength, multiple paths to security, and multiple ways to build civilizations that honored the potential within every being. The 3 students had proven that true apex predators don't just survive and dominate, they create conditions where everyone can thrive, and in doing so, they had given the galaxy a gift more valuable than any technological advancement or military victory. They had given it hope for a future built on cooperation rather than conquest. understanding rather than dominance, and friendship rather than fear. The stars continued their ancient dance around Station Omega 7, but the beings who studied beneath their light now carried new possibilities for what civilization could become when strength was measured, not by who could inflict the most damage, but by who could build the most bridges between former enemies. The humans had shown them all that sometimes the greatest victory wasn't defeating your opponents. It was convincing them to join you for dinner